All right, we are back in 1 Timothy chapter 3, and we have been systematically going through and looking at the office of deacon and learning about this important office within the church. And we have started at the beginning in the book of Acts and looked at why and how God brought them into being, into office, and they certainly met a special need that the church had, and we're thankful that the early church was ready for that transition and that God was able to use that. And so we've answered several questions as we've gone through our study. What is a deacon? And a deacon is a servant who embraces ministry by serving actively, caring for the body of Christ in practical, tangible ways. A man should be known this way before he is considered. And so we looked at those three uses of the word diakonos and then the verb form diakonia and diakoneo, and how those worked. We answered the question, who is a deacon? And a deacon is a man whose pursuit and testimony is proven character, spirit-filled wisdom, sound conviction, family faithfulness, and a faithful servant's heart who holds both honor before men and boldness before God. And so we began to look at that aspect of a deacon and specifically to his character. And we saw that a deacon has several aspects of this, the character of this servant. And we looked at his convictions in 1 Timothy 3 and verse 9. And we are now going to look at his family life and his reward. God doesn't call deacons because of their skill. He calls them because of their spirit-filled character. This isn't about talent. It's not about position. It is about possession, who they are possessed by, the Spirit of God. And so this morning, we're going to look at the family life of a servant. And as Paul is laying this out in 1 Timothy chapter 3, we find that he turns the prism and he moves away from the character of the deacon. And as he goes into the next verses, we find that in verse in verse 11, that he focuses on their family life. In verse 11 it says this, "Even so must their wives be grave, not slanderers, sober, faithful in all things. Let the deacons be the husbands of one wife, ruling their children and their own houses well." And so Paul now puts that focus into a personal life of the deacon. And this morning, we're going to look specifically at the aspect of the deacon's wife. And she is dealt with really in a similar fashion to the deacons. She's dealt with in her character. I want you to notice as Paul opens this section up, he opens by saying, "Even so," there in verse 11. And that is important for us to understand as we look at that word. It's a connecting word that really introduces a new class of people, yet having a similar level of expectation. And so it modifies the entire set of character qualities. just as it connects them to the qualities that have just been looked at. And so when Paul is saying this, he's saying in like manner, just like we dealt with the character of the deacon himself, now we're dealing with these character qualities of his wife. And it's important that he does this. Why would it matter? Well, I would say at least three reasons. One is that there was widow care. You see, in the early church, deacons, no doubt, with their wives alongside of them, ministered to widows. They were women who were often vulnerable, could be easily harmed by careless words and behavior. And so it was important that not just the deacon have good character in his dealings, but his wife as well, because she's serving alongside of him. We see also the idea of home structure. And in the first century, homes were key centers for hospitality, for benevolence, for church gatherings, and ministry that moved outward to others. And because the ministry begins at home, a woman's stability, self-control, and faithfulness help strengthen her husband's leadership rather than weaken it. And then the public relation of the church. Women in the early church, as we looked at several weeks ago, have incredible influence through hospitality and prayer and benevolence, through teaching younger women, as we see in Titus chapter 2. And since the church's witness is public, her conduct can either build trust or damage the reputation of the gospel. And so her character matters not only for her home, but for the honor of Christ and the credibility of the church. And so the deacon's wife plays an integral role in his life. They're one flesh. She's his helpmeet. And although she does not serve in the office, she serves alongside of him. She loves and encourages and helps him in his ministry. And so it's important that they have a character and demeanor that elicits trust and confidentiality. And now Paul is going to name 4 specific qualities that protect these areas of ministry. Look at them with me. The first one we see, and that is the word grave. Even so must their wives be grave, dignified, serious-minded, worthy of respect. And we've seen this word before, and it was used in the description of the deacon himself. It's one of the character qualities that we looked at, and we learned that it goes hand in hand with the character quality in Acts chapter 6 and verse 3, where it says of good report. And that is the word marturio. And we illustrated it this way. We looked at a coin. And this word grave, semnos, it's the idea of the metal content. What it's made of, it's genuine, it's weighty. And the marturio is the stamp of authenticity, the mark that is often seen and verified. And so this word semnos is important. It's about the inner quality, that gravity, that dignity, that nobility that comes in character. Think of it this way. The thermostat and the thermometer, right? Thermometer reacts, the thermostat governs. A thermometer, you'll see it move with the temperature, but the thermostat will set the tone. A grave woman doesn't merely reflect the emotional climate around her, she influences it. And her dignity raises the level of grace in the home, in conversations, and in the church. And so the idea is this, A deacon's wife must possess a quiet strength, an inner stability, and a reverent conduct so that she won't undermine his ability, his credibility, his ministry. And so her seriousness shows in how she handles real life. Now, I want us to understand this. Grave does not mean gloomy. All right, it doesn't mean we walk around stern-faced and we never laugh, we can't enjoy life. It means that she can laugh about and enjoy life, but she knows when to be serious about serious things. So in trials, she responds prayerfully rather than dramatically. And in conflict, she calms the situation instead of fueling it. Around gossip or criticism, she redirects the conversation toward truth and grace. She carries that kind of spirit that gives stability to the home and honor in the church. Her character as a grave woman reflects Christ in ordinary moments. People should be able to see Christ in the way that she talks, in the way that she serves, in the way that she reacts and carries herself. And so in her hospitality, she welcomes others with sincerity. In decision-making, she seeks God's wisdom and not impulsive decisions. In relationships, she's going to treat others with respect, even if they disagree. It implies that she should inspire respect and not demand it. When she is grave, she strengthens her husband's ministry behind the scenes. Her reverence, her steadiness, her maturity become part of her husband's reputation because they minister as a team. And so her words about others, they build up, they don't tear down. Her counsel helps her husband think clearly. Her steadiness keeps him from discouragement when ministry gets heavy. Her character quietly supports her husband. It's the idea of grave and the deacon's wife needs to have that command of her character where there's that dignity that allows her husband to be able to serve in trust of her. I want you to look at the next quality with me. And the deacon was admonished in his section to not be double-tongued. And now Paul encourages the wife in her pattern of speech with a different admonition. And that's the word, not slanderers. Now, I want you to understand, this is a strong use of words that Paul is putting here. I want you to look at another New Testament usage of it, where Paul says, put on the whole armor of God, that ye may be able to stand against the wiles of the devil. You say, well, I don't see that word in there. It is. It's the very last word. Diabolos. This word is used 34 times in the New Testament in reference and in direct description to, used as a name for Satan. Literally, it means devil or accuser or slanderer in this. But in this form, where Paul is dealing with character, it means not a gossip, not a false accuser, not a malicious talker. And the idea is this, and I want you to understand the importance of this character quality, because there are times in the course of meetings or ministry or administration with the deacons that sensitive conversation takes place. And many times that information does not go home and become a topic of conversation. It stays within those four walls with me and the deacons. Why? Because we want our wives to be free to love and to serve others unhindered. But at times, a deacon's wife can become aware of personal or church or widow's benevolence-related information, and her confidentiality is essential. If she's serving alongside of him, there are going to be times where there's information that she learns that is personal and private. And the idea of this is similar to the double-tongued and how you handle the truth. And so a deacon's wife, it's important that she has that quality of not being a slanderer. Sometimes, and we all understand this, okay? Sometimes the temptation can be strong, especially when you feel the need to defend. Have you ever been in that place? Maybe you're defending someone. Maybe a deacon's wife is defending a husband or a child. She feels that need. Maybe you've been in that position at work where somebody accuses or they're just pressuring you, and you feel that need to defend yourself. And many times what comes out is not good. And so we need to understand that temptation can be strong, but the idea is that she must not use words to hurt others. Beloved, this is true for all of us. We shouldn't weaponize our words, shouldn't spread rumors or misuse confidential knowledge. And so, whether it's being double-tongued or gossip, slander, or accusations, none of these should be a part of the character of anyone in the body. All right? It's not just about a deacon's wife. We can all look at this and say, amen, we shouldn't be that way. That should not be a reflection of anyone in church family. One commentator put it this way: being double-tongued, slanderous, an accuser, or a gossip is a satanic sin that destroys reputations, church bodies, and families. Now hear this, beloved. Those actions can contain truth just as much as they can lies and exaggerations. I want you to think about it. You know, sometimes when it comes to controlling our tongue, it's not just about weaponizing words and saying malicious words or unkind words. Sometimes it's about letting truth out that shouldn't be. And so we shouldn't be making excuses. Well, I didn't gossip. Well, the truth is this: gossip includes not just false information, but it includes speaking true information that people have no business hearing. And you say, well, Pastor, is that going on? I have no clue if it's going on or not. I don't think so. It's just preventive maintenance, okay? We're looking at this passage, and it's good for us to see it, right? Because it keeps our hearts and our mouths and tongues in check. And the truth is this, beloved: the tongue can become the devil's tool when ungoverned. What does James say? Boy, James, he hits it right on the nail. Even so, the tongue is a little member and boasteth great things. Behold, how great a matter a little fire kindleth. I mean, you drive by the fire department in Rochester and you see the Smokey the Bear sign, right? Everybody's seen the Smokey the Bear sign out in front of the fire station in City Hall area there. All right, and every now and again it'll have a red high. And what is that saying? Don't start a fire. And yes, it means even if you have a fire circle in your backyard, don't start a fire. Why? Because it's dry. The conditions are incredibly conducive for even the smallest of fire to create something that is going to be disastrous. And the tongue is that way. Boy, it is a little fire, but boy, can it kindle mass damage. And the tongue is a fire, a world of iniquity. So is the tongue among our members, that it defileth the whole body, and setteth on fire the course of nature, and it is set on fire of hell. He goes on, he says, therewith bless we God, even the Father, and therewith curse we men, which are made after the similitude of God. Out of the same mouth proceedeth blessing and cursing. My brethren, these things ought not so to be. What is he saying? He's saying this. We shouldn't be talking to somebody's face and speaking kindly of them, and then turning around and speaking to others and sharing all their dirty laundry. Did you hear what James is picturing there? When we go to a well, and I remember when we would go on camping trips with our youth group, we would go to a local campground, and we would always plan these trips in August. I don't know why, because it was so hot and so humid. And boy, we would get into the heat of the day. We would be playing, and I mean, you'd just be thirsty. And when you get to that point where you are just thirsty and hot and dry, I'm sorry, it doesn't matter. A Coke ain't cutting it. Not even a Moxie's going to cut it, okay? What do you want? You want a cold drink of water. And on this campground, there was an artesian well. And that water would just flow. And that water was like 60 degrees. It was cold. Boy, you go over to that well and you could fill your cup and you could drink that water and be refreshed. And you know what? Every time we went to that well and we filled up, the water was just the same. It was cold and it was refreshing. It was sweet. And this is the picture that James is painting here. If we went to that artesian well and grabbed a drink of water and it tasted like sulfur, something would be wrong. Why? Because a well, a fountain, does not give off sweet water and nasty water. Listen, beloved, you are indwelt by the Spirit of God. When Christ came in and the Spirit came in and we were regenerated and we were transformed and changed, what took place? New heart, new creature. And James is hitting it hard when he's dealing with this concept of the tongue, because a believer ought to be just what Christ was to him, a fountain of life. And beloved, we as believers ought to be fountains of life in our actions and in our speech. And it is a serious conflict when we as believers begin to bubble out sulfur water. Right? We ought to be sweet fountains in our speech, in our words, in our actions. And so James is doing well here in his description. He goes on. He says, can the fig tree bear olive berries? Either a vine figs? So can no fountain both yield salt water and fresh. It's one or the other. What is James encouraging these believers to do? He's encouraging them to live as who they are. And he's encouraging each of us to live as who we are in our words and our speech. Paul spoke to the Colossian church about the tongue's power to preserve rather than to burn and destroy. He said, let your speech be always with grace, seasoned with salt. Let me tell you a secret, all right? The best way to enjoy a good smoked pork shoulder or a good smoked turkey. Now, some of you may not like this because some of you may be on this side of it. It's not a wet brine. It's not putting it in salt water. It's a dry brine, but it's salt. And what do? You take a turkey and you take kosher coarse salt and you mix it with seasoning. And you take that turkey and you... Nobody's writing it down. That's good. All right. You lift that skin, you get underneath the skin, and you rub that salt into the meat. And you say, well, boy, a turkey that's not been cooked, you're going to leave it sitting out in the refrigerator for up to 72 hours? Uh-huh. You know why? Because the salt is tenderizing it and it's preserving it. It's doing its work. It's doing an incredible thing. And what happens? You have this really flavorful pulled pork or this really flavorful turkey. The salt has a preserving power to it. It has the ability to bring a flavor to it that brings out all the taste of the goodness of the meat and all the taste of the seasoning. And Paul says we need to let our speech be always with grace, seasoned with salt. May God help us, both men and women, to strive for that in our hearts and actions. A people that live out Ephesians 4:29, let no corrupt communication proceed out of your mouth, but that which is good to the use of edifying, that it may minister grace unto the hearers. That ought to be our speech. You know what? If we have a problem with our speech, whether it's truth, whether it is unkind words, whether it's double-tongued or slanderous, maybe we ought to be praying a daily prayer. Lord, I want to be a sweet fountain for you. Please, keep me from corrupt and rotting talk. May my words today not burn but preserve. Holy Spirit, would you guide my conversation and reactions and give me words that build up? Please prompt my spirit and mind with words that are suited to each moment. Would you give me words that are filled with grace and that will minister grace to those with whom I speak? Oh, it ought to be in our hearts. And beloved, if we are struggling with that, it ought to be a daily prayer. Lord, help me with this. And so all of us do well to take heed to the character quality that Paul is putting forth here. A deacon's wife should be grave. She should be dignified and respectable, but she also ought to not be slanderous in her words, and neither should we, any of us. I want you to look at the next one as well. We find there in verse 11, and that is that she should be sober. Now, look back at verse 2. It says, a bishop then must be blameless, the husband of one wife, vigilant, sober, of good behavior, given to hospitality, apt to teach. Now, did you see that same word in there? Anybody see the same word? It's not the word that you think. It's not the word sober in verse 2, it's the word vigilant. Now, I want you to understand this. And this is where it's important at times that when we read our Bible, and maybe if you're reading a King James, at times we have words that mean what we think they mean, but they don't really mean what we think we mean. Okay? And this word in 1611, the word vigilant that we see in verse 2, which is the same word we just read, sober for the deacon's wife. In 1611, vigilant meant, it carried the meaning of being clear-minded. And maybe if you're looking in a different translation this morning, that you see it defined that way. But here in verse 11, the nuance of the text is pointing to the character and conduct. So here, our word is carrying the meaning or the idea of being balanced, self-controlled, not ruled by mood, anger, emotion, fear, cravings. It's that sobriety. Mounce explains it this way: her emotional life must be under control. That's the idea of this word, sober. Now, why is this important? As a helpmeet to the deacon, being sober helps to protect her husband from rash decisions. Listen, wives, your husband, yes, in God's structure, when we look at the home, the head of the husband is the wife, and he bears tremendous responsibility. And understand that, all right? Understand as well sometimes God puts together a mover and shaker and a plotter. And sometimes the husband is the plotter and the wife is the mover and shaker, all right? That's okay, as long as we understand how God made us. And so what must a wife be careful of? She needs to be careful about not having just letting her emotions rule her and in turn pushing her husband. All right, I'm not saying that you can't ask him to do things, that there shouldn't be honey-do lists. I'm not saying that, but I am saying that many times when emotions are out of control, it can make decision-making, it can make moving forward very difficult. And so the idea that Mounce is saying her emotional life needs to be under control, it is important. It's important not just for a deacon's wife, but for all of us that we be a level-headed person. And I want you to look with me at Proverbs 31, and I'll project some of this on the screen, but I want you to put your finger there because we're going to go back to it here in just a moment. But Proverbs 31 is important here. I believe it's a great illustration as the writer opens up in this section of a virtuous woman. The idea of this sobriety, being under control and level-headed, building a trust with your husband or building a trust with those with whom you serve. Look at what the writer writes. Who can find a virtuous woman? For her price is far above rubies. Now notice this. The heart of her husband doth safely trust in her, so that he shall have no need of spoil. He's not afraid. Not afraid of being harmed or hurt or losing out. She will do him good and not evil all the days of her life. These verses are incredibly applicable to this idea of sobriety. And it ought to be modeled by all of us and all ladies. You see, a husband rests securely because his wife is trustworthy. She's steady. She's dependable. She's faithful. And her character in this idea of sobriety, it removes fear. He knows her integrity. He knows that she's solid. He doesn't feel like he's continually having to maintain emotional swings. She brings him blessing and not loss. The ideas are wisdom and management benefit the home. They benefit their relationship. They build it. And then her moral character protects the family's reputation and resources. And so Proverbs 31 gives us one of the strongest biblical statements on marital trust. And it emphasizes the wife's character and the husband's confidence in her. I want you to think about this, because in their culture, it was important to have confidence in a spouse because the household economy was collaborative. In other words, both had their hands in the household economy. There were men who traveled. Guess who took care of finances? Guess who managed the home? The wife did. He needed to trust her, and she needed to be trustworthy. Her management of finances, property, servants, and trade, it was crucial. And so a trustworthy wife prevented things like social shame and financial disaster. There was a wisdom and a sobriety about her in which her husband, whether it was leaving and taking care of business for a few months or being out in the field day to day and managing the day-to-day work going on out in the fields, he was secure in his trust for her at home. And so, wives, your sobriety is extremely important in your walk with God and your walk with your husband. Listen, we live in a similar society to that of Proverbs 31, where it is almost necessary to live on two incomes. And so sobriety that builds trust and removes fear and pressure is essential. You should do all that you can to help, support, encourage, offer godly counsel and input to bring stability and even to bring biblical financial success to your home and relationship. Listen, be your husband's precious jewel that he will treasure all your lives. You say, well, you haven't talked about the husbands. Well, we'll save that for another time, okay? Husbands aren't getting off, all right? But we're dealing with the deacons' wives here. And the truth is, again, when we look at this Proverbs 31 woman, I wish we had time to go all the way through the chapter or through the section and look at her, because, boy, does she carry character qualities and actions that even us men ought to emulate. But a deacon's wife, all of us, women, men, we ought to be sober, clear-minded, not driven by our emotion, not driven by our anxiety, but level-headed, trusting in God. Our walk with God is solid. And then we find the final one. Look again in verse 11. Paul writes, faithful in all things. And the idea of that is a faithfulness, a steadiness in every respect. Really, it spans across all of her life. you could really look at this as like the summary statement or an umbrella quality that covers all the others. What is this? She's living a gospel-centered life in character, godliness, and holiness, no matter where she is or who she is with. She's the same woman, wife, mother, and manager to all who know her. Now, can we go back to Proverbs 31 for a moment? Hopefully you got your finger there. Look at verses 23 through 30. Her husband is known in the gates, when he sitteth among the elders of the land. She maketh fine linen, and selleth it, and delivereth girdles unto the merchant. Strength and honor are her clothing, and she shall rejoice in time to come. It's the idea of she plans and prepares for the future. She's not anxious about what is to come because she is prudent and diligent to be ready. She opened her mouth with wisdom, and in her tongue is the law of kindness. She looketh well to the ways of her household, and eateth not the bread of idleness. Now notice this, her children rise up and call her blessed, her husband also. And he praiseth her. Many daughters have done virtuously, but thou excellest them all. Favor is deceitful and beauty is vain, but a woman that feareth the Lord shall be praised. Now, although it may seem it, this woman is not perfect, but she is consistent. And that is what the text is revealing. Faithfulness, beloved, is not found in perfection or overflowing talent. Faithfulness is just being trustworthy and consistently walking with and growing in the Lord in everyday life. And so, do we simply leave these qualities to the wives of deacons? No. Just like the first men were deaconing before there was ever an office of deacon, so the women were deaconing too. Living in godly character, supporting their husbands and family, and serving the body. And these are certainly characteristics that we should all be emulating. We should all be someone others can rely on. We should all be someone who doesn't break trust, but builds it. We should all be someone whose speech is consistently truthful, graceful, and edifying. We should all be someone who honors Christ in both public and private life. We should all be consistently growing in and walking with the Lord every day. And so a deacon's wife must be someone of dignified character, guarded speech, sober-minded stability, and proven reliability. She reflects a holiness of life that strengthens her husband's ministry and protects the church from disorder, gossip, and instability. Her character bears weight. Her words bring healing rather than harm, and her mind is steady, and her life is trustworthy in every respect. Paul's words about the deacon's wife remind us that character is not a small matter. It protects the vulnerable, strengthens a home, upholds the church. And though she doesn't hold an office, her influence is real, and her dignity, her guarded speech, her steady spirit, they reinforce the ministry of her husband. And in truth, these qualities are not just for deacon's wife, but they're for every believer who wants their life to point others to Christ. May God help us as we consider the character of a deacon's wife and apply it to our own. Father, we ask as we go into this time, we look into our own hearts. Lord, would you reveal to us what we need to change? Father, may we be obedient, submissive to your Spirit. As we go into this time, we take these moments and reflect on our text this morning. Pianist is going to play a verse of invitation. God's dealing in your heart. Maybe you're here and you're saying, boy, those are some pretty big character qualities. Well, we don't all possess it naturally. But Jesus Christ died and rose again so that we could have these character qualities through him. Listen, if you're here without Christ, you can't emulate those, because it's only by his power and spirit. And I would say that if you don't know him and you're looking at these, maybe he's calling out to your heart this morning. Maybe if you're in Christ, you feel the weight of the passage. You may be asking yourself, is my dignity pointing others to Jesus? Or my words healing or harming? Is my emotional life governed by the Spirit or by impulse? Am I faithful, the same person, every place and with every person? Would you examine your heart this morning? Ask God to show you where your character, speech, or stability needs his grace. Will you surrender it to him? Will you cry out to him, say, God, help me. I need to be a sweet fountain. Lord,